Good evening, everyone. My name is Randy Livingston. I am the chairman of the board here at the Greenstone United Methodist Church. I would like to welcome every one of you, each and every one of you, to this Ninth Ward Aldermanic Forum today, which is January 29th, from 4 to 6. Here at Greenstone United Methodist Church, 11211 South St. Lawrence, that sits in the Pullman Historic National Park. Used to be monument, but now it's park. I'd like to welcome each and one of you all again. I'd like to welcome the League of Women Voters of Chicago for this forum. I'd like to welcome our candidates participating, Cameron Barnes and Cleopatra Draper, and all of you all who are sitting out in the audience who are concerned about your area here with your automatic person. This gives you a chance to, I guess, decide which way you're going if you haven't already made your decision yet. Thank you. And welcome again. We're going to have what's your name? Jane. Jane, to come and take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Livingston, and thank the Greenstone United Methodist Church for hosting, and thank you to our audience who are both here in person and who will be watching it later or on live stream. Just a few quick words about the two co-sponsoring organizations. The League of Women Voters of Chicago is a 100-year-old nonpartisan organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy and education. Our hope is that in providing this forum today, citizens may become better informed about the issues facing their community and become better acquainted with the candidates running for this office. We're so happy to have the People's Response Network as our co-sponsor today. They are an important organization that came together to address the COVID-19 emergency by rebuilding and democratizing public health and the public sector. Their work continues. Just a few sort of logistics about this candidate forum. There were note cards passed out and audience questions. Our moderator will ask all audience questions. Note cards and pencils have been provided on which to submit your questions. Just so you know, questions will be screened for duplication, clarity, and appropriateness to the office being discussed. Questions must be directed to both candidates. Please signal a forum volunteer when your question is ready for submission. Also signal a volunteer if additional note cards are needed, even during the forum. I'd now like to introduce our forum moderator, Philip Horrigan of the League of Women Voters of Chicago.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Phil. I have a couple of logistical things to go over before we start with 90-second candidate introductory statements from each of the candidates, starting in alphabetical order. At this point, I would hope that all cell phones and mobile devices and any unauthorized audio and video recording devices would be turned off. The audience should withhold their applause and other expressions of support or disagreement during the event. We have a lot of get done right now. We want the candidates to have as much time to speak as possible. So we really hope that you can stay quiet and let them do their thing. Applause is appropriate at the beginning and at the end of the event. Questions and response times will always be indicated by me to the candidates, and a candidate will be allowed to finish their sentence once started when the time is up. But I will be enforcing the strict time limit. For the most part, the forum will follow a traditional question and answer format with timed responses. Periodically, I'll ask the candidate questions that you guys sent up. You guys know how that system works. Raise the note card when you're ready. And I will phase out the questions that are either duplicates or inappropriate, as you heard before. After the question and answer portion of this forum ends, we'll have plenty of time for the candidates to stand at the back of the church and receive any in-person questions that you want to ask. So if anything you heard up here you want more clarification on, that's the perfect time for that. If anything you wanted to ask but didn't get asked, you can ask that back there. So, with that, I think we are ready to begin. We're going to start with Mr. Barnes here. He will have 90 seconds for his opening statement, and then we'll move on to the questions after Cleopatra's statement, of course. All you. Thank you, both candidates. We now have another 60-second question on funding. Alder people have two forms of discretionary funding. The first is TIF money, collected from homes and businesses in the TIF areas, and those funds can be used to improve infrastructure and stimulate economic development. The second is menu funds that can be used on any of the ward's needs. How do you plan on spending the ward's budget, and will you work with the community to decide those allocations? I'm going to start with you.
Well, I plan on spending the budget the way the community tells me to spend the budget. I mean, we keep putting the responsibility on one person who does not care to consult with the constituent of how your money should be spent. It is not our money. We're just the gatekeeper of it. Why don't we have quarterly consultations to let you know what the budget is? These are the priorities. What are your priorities? And so I'm just a candidate that's going to continue to speak to the people. I'm not here to make your agenda for you. You're supposed to tell me, Cameron, we need our potholes filled. We need a tree cut down next door. We need, one lady told me for 30 years she's had a pothole, her sidewalk has been broken up for 30 years. That's allocation of money. We gatekeep that money. And so I plan to spend the money exactly the way the residents tell me to spend the money. And when I get in the office and you think I'm not doing it, you come to my office and you tell me, Cameron, you need to spend the money somewhere else, and we'll have that conversation.
Thank you for that question. So when we speak of the prerogative of the alderman, historically it's been abused, right? So that's no stranger to Chicago. So the menu money, to be clear, is $1.6 million. And TIF is a special allocation. And unfortunately, when you think of it, at times throughout the city, and sometimes here, it's been used as a slush fund. Right, so the reallocation of where it needs to go, it needs to be met with equity. I desire a ward where I can shop and have a sit-down meal with my family. Right? And that needs to be built when it comes to our TIF money to a world that we dream of. Now, uniquely, what you won't find here is participatory budgeting. That needs to be enacted. Therefore, that allows you all to have a seat at the table so that the sole autonomy of that decision of how we spend the menu money and how we spend the TIF money will not rest on the heels of just the alderman. I am here to be the next alder person with that mindset, because that is the progressive vision that I have.
Thank you. This is going to be our second audience question. You'll each have 45 seconds. How do you plan on bringing greater transparency to city government, and what will you do to hold people accountable for ethical violations? I'm going to start with you.
I have a retort. When you say people ethical, some specificity.
I'm just reading the...
Then read the question again. Read the question one more time.
How would you, as an alderperson, bring greater transparency to the government of Chicago and hold people accountable for ethical violations?
Okay. I can think back to 2019 when I ran, and I remember hearing folks say, when you take this office, we're going to hold you accountable. And what I've realized in the 4 years of me monitoring the performance of this office, I'm not too sure both sides know how to hold each other accountable. And I think that that's fair. And what it means is that the expectation of the role in terms of what an alderperson does and is supposed to perform, as opposed to the expectation from a constituent and what you all expect. So for me, the teacher in me wants to teach everybody how to hold me accountable, because that's fair, right? And then when I think of ethical, I run away from the word transparent, because we've yet to be honest We need more honest conversations. When I hear the word transparency, I hear smoke and mirrors. So I'm just honest.
So, for a much more layman's terms answer, transparency is just transparency. You ought to be able to see what I see. Of course, there are some things that we cannot share, obviously, with the entire constituency because there are some things that are classified, if you will. But when you talk about transparency, that's where I said earlier, quarterly consultations. You ought to be able to access your alderman at any given time during the time of normal business hours. So you ought to be able to come and knock on their door. You ought to be able to come, give them a call, get a response to their emails and everything. You ought to be able to know who your alderman is, and your alderman knows who you are. And so when you talk about transparency, it's not a matter of bringing it back because we have no transparency. So it's a matter of implementing transparency here. And well, as far as the ethical piece, the rules are the rules. Stick to the rules.
Thank you. As you know, there has been significant commitment to development in the ward, including a new hotel, new grocery stores, new community centers, and the Roseland Medical District. Please discuss in 60 seconds how you plan to support and provide oversight of these projects.
I plan to provide oversight in each one of these. I'm not going to support anything that's going to step on the toes of the people. And I'm telling you that right now. Do not get surprised when I come in and we hold up progress, because I believe that our people are going to bear the brunt of it. The community development that came into Pullman, I went into Roseland and talked to some business owners, and they told me, do you know, Cameron, our taxes have tripled and we can't almost afford to even stay here anymore. We can't own our homes anymore. We can't operate our businesses anymore. If it is not going to be something that's going to uplift the community and going to be beneficial to the residents, I'm not supporting it, and I'm going to tell you that right now. I plan to, of course, at all times, we got to have the conversation with the constituents, and your alderman ought to come to you and say, this is what I plan to do. What do you think of this? Do you think this can work? And go with the majority. They should be able to have effective conversation between the constituents and the office to be able to come up with a viable plan that everyone walks away from the table happy with.
Sure, I've been asked to repeat the question. Please discuss how you plan to support and provide oversights of the development projects in the ward. I can specifically with respect to the new hotel, new grocery stores, new community centers, and the Roseland Medical District.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So I'm excited. I am excited to see the ward flourish. But I want to speak specifically to the listing. So for the hotel, my hope is that we protect the fair wage of hotel workers. You know, it's a beautiful thing to bring construction and development, but what's not beautiful is when working families can't maintain the stability to thrive in the city of Chicago. And I specifically want them to call the Ninth Ward home. So if we're going to bring an attraction, I want folks to live in the attraction. When we think of the grocery store, from my understanding, is nestled in the 10th Ward, but because it neighbors the 9th Ward, I am grateful because the furthest south is an island, and it's cruel and unusual how we live in the 9th Ward when it becomes a desert. When I think of the medical district, it's been designated a medical district for the past 7 years, and that speaks to where we stand in leadership today. That is finally being enacted, and I've yet to see the full plan, but I've seen the proposal. And last but not least, the community center. Make it affordable, and I'm interested to see who sits on the board and how that board functions.
Thank you very much. You'll have 90 seconds for this next question. Public safety and gun violence are among the top concerns throughout Chicago for this election. What realistically could you, as an alderperson and member of the City Council, do to reduce gun violence and improve public safety in the short term and in the long term? I'm going to start with you.
One more time. I think you have questions.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I think you're so close.
yeah. So, public safety and gun violence are among the top concerns throughout Chicago. What realistically could you, as an alderperson and member of the City Council, do to reduce gun violence and improve public safety in the short term and in the long term?
Thank you. Sorry about that. When I think of public safety, it is a major need. Recently we had technically a shooting, a mass shooting, if you will, at Walmart, and a number of neighbors were not informed. I, being myself and my husband, we went to Walmart the next day and had no idea. And in the short term of that scale, we need a community alert. It's not a secret. I'm not hiding anything that's in my toolkit. But I mean, a rapid response. That Walmart is within proximity of the 5th District, and it's no fault to the 5th District, but it speaks to the need for us to have community policing, which is why it's so important for these council districts that are forming across the city of Chicago. And I have faith in the work that they're going to champion. And the long term of us working collaboratively is not only echoing the need for legislation around gun control, but what makes me feel safe in my community besides community policing is, again, affordable housing, mental health clinics being open, the stability of a thriving community. If we put that in place and we measure that to scale, I'm sure there'll be a decrease. It cannot be the onus on the people or the people put the onus on the police. I think it takes all of us, and I am a team player with respect to that, because we need to be evaluative. Right? So that means every quarter we're looking at our performance. And now that we have these new district council people coming into play, I think that'll make a big difference.
As a national civil rights activist moving around the country, from LA to New York, I get so tired of folk talking about our answer to gun violence is in the police. Police are responders. When the police get involved, the violence have already happened. That's a response to the violence that has already happened. If we begin to focus on prevention instead of responding, then you take away a little bit of the burden from the police. I think that we need to focus on, it goes back to what you said about these vacant lots. If we employed that community development financial institution to allow residents to then erect buildings that can serve as safe havens, that can serve as computer labs, that can serve as different places where students can go do their homework, can go get incentivized mentorships, can go get an apprenticeship, get an internship. That then causes prevention of violence. And then you won't have to be sure that, or somewhat kind of shaky of whether or not it will then decrease. You can be absolutely positive that when you focus on preventing violence, you then prevent violence. So that's the short term and the long term of it. The long term of it is what we will see from the short term. The short term is going to be, we're going to focus on preventing violence. We're going to focus on the fact of not putting students out because they have quote unquote ADHD, instead of asking them, what's wrong with you? Did you eat this morning? Did you sleep in a bed last night? Do we focus on trying to prevent violence or respond to it?
Thank you. This next question will be 45 seconds. Should the Chicago Police Department move forward with the Criminal Enterprise Information System, otherwise known as the new gang database? Why or why not? We're going to start with you.
Can you repeat that?
Of course. Should the Chicago Police Department move forward with the Criminal Enterprise Information System, otherwise known as the new gang database? Why or why not?
Well, at this point, we've already been focused on responding and not preventing. So we failed our children, and they have fallen into gangs. But you got to understand that when you take away everything else, they're trying to survive. And we're criminalizing our students, we're criminalizing our black men, our black women, our people of color. Doesn't matter who it is, we're criminalizing people for literally surviving. If you took your mother or your father out of your household, if the other parent was then working 2 jobs to provide for themselves and their 3 children, and then you had to become mom or dad at 13 or 14 or 15 years old, and you also had to get rich quick, would you fall into some things that may be criminally active? I mean, do we criminalize people, or do we really continue to focus on prevention or responding? So, I guess to technically answer the question, I know I'm supposed to stop, but I guess they can go head on with it, but they need to do prevention.
Thank you for the question. The answer is no. When I think of a book like that, that's a book for life, and life goes on. We already have a penal system that respectfully is broken, right? And we know that we have a lot of kinks, and there needs to be a national reform. For the love of God, we just lost a man before our eyes in Memphis. He was not just a man, he was a father. And yes, that happened with officers, yet again. So when we think about profiling, racism, you know, that book for life follows you for the rest of your days. And the only book for life I want to read is the good book. And that book is not good. That book is broken. And it doesn't have any dreams of futures of growth in America.
Thank you very much. For this next question, you'll have 45 seconds, and this is from the audience. What will you do to ensure that banks of streetlights do not remain unlit for long periods of time?
Did you say banks of streetlights?
Yeah, streetlights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you tired of the silhouettes? Can't see your neighbors at night? Me too. I don't know who I be waving to. I must admit. And you know what it speaks to? We laugh about it, but it speaks to, it's a public safety issue, right? And then, not to mention a neighbor that has the good lights on this block and what you got to do to get the good lights on that block. I think it's sad and it's childish, and it's a misappropriation of not only the prerogative, but the funding. Because at the end of the day, even if something was to occur, mapping out something with a silhouette is not safety, right? It's dangerous. And that's the least we can do. We live in the third largest city in America. And the fact that we're still begging for streetlights speaks volumes to poor leadership. Because at the end of the day, if something was to tragically happen, it would be based upon what? A streetlight?
So if I heard your question correctly, you're saying, what will we do to make sure that banks of streetlights do not remain unlit? Okay. Guys, it's not rocket science. Change the bulb. Look at your neighbor and say, change the bulb.
Okay, thank you. As we all know, the city of Chicago is in the midst of a mental health crisis. Young people have been traumatized by gun violence, while untreated citizens live on the street or are often locked up in Cook County Jail. How can the city establish more mental health facilities and services and make sure that people are placed, or that they are placed where they are needed the most by people? We'll start with you.
You got some stacked questions. Tell me that one more time.
I got you. The city of Chicago is in the midst of a mental health crisis. Young people have been traumatized by gun violence, while untreated citizens live on the street and are often locked up in Cook County Jail. How can the city establish more mental health facilities and services and make sure that they are placed where they are needed the most? And you'll have 60 seconds.
Okay. So in 2023, there's a $16.4 billion budget in the city of Chicago. If you break it up evenly, that's equitably, which we're not used to doing, but if you break it up evenly, that's well over $320 million per ward. What that simply means is, again, prioritizing our resource allocation. There are needs in certain areas of the city that are greater than the others. And so what that is that we go into the community. Everything goes back to consulting with the community and coming in and saying, do we prioritize bringing in more mental health services that address these needs, or do we continue to let our money kind of go to whomever the alderman allocates it to, who then misappropriates those funds and we bear the brunt of it? So basically the answer to that question is we look at our budget, we prioritize our budget, and then we take those vacant lots and begin erecting institutions that are going to actually address the needs of the people, and we're going to stop playing politics and start taking care of people.
I want to be interactive. When I say funding, you say matters. Funding. So when I think of funding for mental health, How about it doesn't come out of our budget? That is a crisis that is rocking the country. So when we think of ingenuity and innovation, that speaks to the progression of the leadership that I hope to bring if I am humble enough to serve as the next alderperson. So uniquely, we have Bally's Casino coming, guys. We have multi-billion-dollar projects being built every day around the city and throughout the country. Mental health should be provided for free throughout the city of Chicago. That is a funnel tool for the penal system. That is the instability that will one day break the mold when it comes to what is being influxed, because holistically and comprehensively, our families are under attack. And when you are under attack, how do you fight back if you don't have the tools? So I'm not interested in taking that from my menu budget. I'm not interested in taking that from the TIF. I'm interested in the city paying their fair share for what's rightfully ours in the city of Chicago, which is our mental health.
Thank you. As a city council member, would you support creating public health teams, including public health nurses and community health workers in Chicago's highest risk neighborhoods? And if so, how would you help support their implementation? You'll have 45 seconds. I can repeat if you want. And we're going to start with you.
You know what? Proudly, we were recently endorsed by the Illinois Nurses Association. I am a social worker. I'm a graduate from Jane Addams. That sounds like a world I want to live in, when you have teams of support. Because at the end of the day, you know, when you do call for services, whether it's CPD, they may need a health expert by their side. Their experiences are vast when they're called to the scene, and it needs to be supported with a social work and a social service support team, because it might be a cry for mental health. 9 times out of 10, often it is. The calls aren't always criminal. So that sounds like a world that I would want to dwell in and champion for, because we need to grow that. We've learned that throughout COVID, we've had a deficiency when it comes to our health experts, and we need to grow that, starting with our young people walking into these roles to stabilize our communities.
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. So, would you support public health teams, and then how would you support public health teams was the last part.
Well, absolutely, I'd support public health teams, and the way that we would do so, I do agree with Cleopatra. We're going to have to begin to put in these community health services along with the policing, along with everything. Every social service institution, every nonprofit organization, every church even, like we're sitting in today, should have access and a seat at the table to the very things that come in to address these mental health services. That's how we then distribute it to it. If we have community health care services and we're supporting these teams, how then do we get that to the constituency? We put that in a space where they go and they serve daily, weekly, and it becomes at their fingertips the same way that they're able to get any other service that they've already been getting.
Thank you. For this next question, you'll each have 60 seconds. Chicago's 50 alder people don't have obvious power over the city's schools. But what will you do as a concerned alderman to impact the quality and trajectory of education in the ward? And we'll start with you.
Well, one of my literature points, if you see on my website, is education innovation. What we're going to have to do is change education to match the era that we're in. Now, you can go into McDonald's today and not even interact with a person. You can order on a screen, you can pick up your order, and you've never talked to anyone. That is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. I like to say STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, coding, and robotics. We then have to make that a robust part of our education system. This is what's going on today. Robots are now taking the jobs of waiters and waitresses, but it creates another job because somebody has to build that robot. And so why aren't our children exposed to the technological area that we live in today? They should know how to code. If Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter and do what he wants to do with it, when we're teaching coding in the 9th Ward, that means your son or your daughter can then go and build the new Twitter. Twitter. They only came to Twitter for Black Twitter anyway. Why can't a black person come and then code a new app in the first place? Bring that education innovation to CPS even now, and all school systems.
You know, there's an elephant in the room. It's not just Cameron and I running. The alderman is never present. And one thing about it is that he closed 50 black schools, he and a few of his colleagues, black and brown schools. Did that make it more equitable? No. There's been protests for more nurses, social workers, decent food, resources, books, so on and so forth. And a number of those schools are nestled right here in the Ninth Ward, but not those that aren't selective enrollment. See, these barriers and labels we put barriers and chains on our children. And you chase those chains until you can't no more. So until we champion for what's equitable, and again, every school should have a social worker, every school should have a nurse, resources, books. I mean, is that not the definition of a reasonable, decent school? That's the school, if it doesn't have it, my son wouldn't be there. So that's the school that I will champion for, schools that are equitably met and funded.
Oh, thank you. This next question is a combination of two audience questions, and you'll each have 60 seconds to answer it. How do you plan on funding all of your plans and working with the others on City Council to get those things done?
What was that last part?
And how do you plan on working with the other members of City Council to get those things done?
Yes, ma'am. If I heard you correctly, you said, how do you plan on funding my plans? Okay. You know what? I'll also address this. Currently, we've seen a very tumultuous relationship with the incumbent and the mayor. It's no secret. But what's also reasonable to say is that it's bear no fruits. Yes, work has still moved forward in Pullman because it was because of the prior administration and the phenomenal work of CNI, right? You have to be able to work with people. My mother's off to the left here. And one thing I always say, when I was a little girl, I was 5, and I used to come home and tell my mother how I would come back with all of these friends, and she was quick to school me. And I learned the word associate. She said, I'm your best friend. I didn't send you to school to make friends. I sent you to school to learn. So when you send me to the council, you send me to the council to come back with resources, fruits of labor, and hopefully to make friends, because I have to cross the aisle. I know they say it's nonpartisan, but some folks come with their democracy spirit and some people come with other spirits. But I am willing to work with everybody to get it done, because I'm in the business of doing better business for the Ninth Ward, and that means coming home with some resources.
Again, 2023, $16.4 billion with a B dollar budget in Chicago. I've already told you, if it was split it up equally, that would be over $320 million to the Ninth Ward. Can you fund what you want to see in the Ninth Ward with $320 million? I'm sure you could. And like I said, there are areas that need more access than others. So that's if it was split up evenly. If it was split up equitably, which is a much different word, of course, we would have more than $300 million. I believe my plan of revitalization without gentrification, education, innovation, and to reprioritize resource allocation can be found within the boroughs of over $300 million. That's how you fund it. The city has a budget for a reason. We're not exempt from the budget just because we're the Ninth Ward. We're a part of Chicago. What are y'all talking about? I mean, where are you going to find the funding? The funding, we've been given the funding. You the city council. That's why you go to the mayor and you say, we're not voting on that until our equitable piece comes to the Ninth Ward.
Thank you. This next question is on the environment, and you'll each have 60 seconds to answer it. The city of Chicago, over a decade ago, dissolved its Department of the Environment, leaving a broad range of environmental issues to be dealt with across scattered city departments. Do you support the reestablishment of the Department of the Environment? And also, what do you think are the most urgent environmental issues facing the Ninth Ward, and how do you plan on addressing them? So, 2 parts. Reestablishment of the Department of the Environment, and what are the Ninth Ward's most pressing environmental issues, and how do you plan on addressing them? We're going to start with you.
You absolutely have to reinstate the Department of the Environment. If you know the history of the Ninth Ward, if you know the history of Altgale Gardens and along, which is now in the 10th Ward, which is a whole different subject we have to have. I'm not even going to take some time on that. But that whole corridor was built for the families of World War II veterans, African-American World War II veterans that are coming home from the war, built on a wasteland. We're built literally on a landfill. That's why it smells so bad going through the Ninth Ward on that end of the city. So what do you mean that they dissolved the Department of the Environment when that was literally a priority for us in the Ninth Ward? So absolutely, that's one of my top priorities, is to then reinstate that program. The environmental issues are, there is lead in the water already. There is different things that deal with you being built on a landfill with fossil fuel gases coming up through your home as we speak, sewage coming up. I've done this already in Concordia Place apartments. There has to be some kind of environmental rescue in the Ninth Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to raise up a name, Hazel Johnson. She's the mother of the environmental justice movement, and her daughter continues to champion that work, Cheryl Johnson, PCR. So I'm going to say this, the EPA brown zone, air pollution. We live right outside of the carbon thumbprint that we all call the Bishop Ford. Air pollution is the greatest, if I was to point it out, but there's not a door I knock somebody's not battling or have succumbed to cancer, breast, lung. During the first campaign, I lost my father to prostate cancer. There's a correlation. The toxicity of the land. There's some parts of the Ninth Ward you can't stay longer than 8 hours. I won't claim it or name it, but we know it to be true because of the historical disrespect of the people that have lived here from companies that did not care. So yes, there needs to be a reinstatement, absolutely. And in fact, I had the privilege to spend time with the former commissioner. She's brilliant. I like smart people, and they're going to work for us to protect us. So yes.
Thank you very much. This is another combination of 2 audience questions as we're winding down here. You'll have 60 seconds to answer. What are your qualifications for the role of alderperson, and what have you done in the past 5 years to help the ward?
I almost want to say survive in Chicago is one qualification, born and raised, right? No, with all jokes aside, I've been to 4 public schools in my entire life, and that includes graduate school. I have a master's from Jane Addams College of Social Work. I'm a Jane Addams Scholar. I went on to Eastern. I was a General Assembly Scholar. I'm a graduate of Kenwood, but most of all, you know, my newest title is being Toussaint's mother. I got married after the first election, and I have had the privilege to build an organization to a nonprofit, but I'm not alone. My greatest title now is that I'm a member of the Far South Coalition, and I get to sit with hardworking people that devote a lot of their life and energy, respectively, to their nonprofits, as far to the Bishop Ford to I-57. And that coalition, it drums hard. I'm like on an Olympian all-star team. And it's an honor to serve with people that care about the far south side. So not just the 9th Ward, the 21st Ward too. And that means a lot. So I have grown a baby from diapers to watching it flourish because I'm committed to what's on my heart. And that's our ward.
So I am a 3rd generation lifelong resident of the ward. My grandparents bought their house 57 years ago. I'm the former National Youth Director of the Rainbow Push Coalition. I've been sought after across the country for voting rights, national civil rights, to bring awareness to different young people issues. When, as Ms. Cleopatra mentioned, when CICS Larry, well, first of all, when Carver Middle School was then turned to CICS Larry Hawkins and then 6 years later closed, we rallied. I led led that protest outside of CICS Larry Hawkins. I was the service coordinator of Concordia Place Apartments. We brought COVID relief and vaccines and testing to the constituents at their door. We hosted monthly events every month since July of 2021. We've hosted a back-to-school event. We've hosted every major holiday you can think of. We've given away coats, we've given away food, we've given away school supplies, and we've brought national and federal attention to the 9th Ward from the work that I have done myself in the 9th Ward as a lifelong resident.
Thank you very much. For our last question before your 2-minute closing statements, what are 2 other major issues in the ward that we haven't touched on this afternoon, and how do you plan on addressing them? You'll have 60 seconds.
Who you want to start?
You.
Well, I don't think, other than in my responses, we have talked about the community involvement in the 9th Ward, the fact that constituents don't have a voice. Many of us feel like we've been ignored and disregarded for 24 years. It has not been addressed why our current leadership refuses to speak to the residents of the 9th Ward, of which he was sworn to represent and protect. So I think that's the biggest thing that we haven't touched on. And then, I mean, there's a myriad of things. I don't know if we have anything else that we haven't too much touched on that we need to touch on right away. At least my mind isn't coming up with one right now. I'm concerned about whether or not the constituents have a voice or a seat at the table. We've not talked about the gentrification that has come. We've not talked about the raising of taxes and the choking of residents that they can no longer even afford to live here. And we've not talked about the disparities of what is not in the ward. Like I said, no theater, no pharmacy, there's no sit-down restaurant, there's no dry cleaners, there are no services. You got to go outside of the ward to thrive in the ward, and that's what we need to talk about.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. In 60 seconds, what are 2 other major issues in the ward that we haven't touched on this afternoon, and how do you plan on addressing them?
Thank you for the question. You know, we tiptoe with violence, but I'm going to take us to a place of concern. You know, there are a number of people, women in particular, that go missing in the 9th Ward that gets no coverage on no news media because 9 times out of 10, they're predominantly black. The 9th Ward, specifically Roseland, is the #1 community for sex trafficking. A lot of people think that's a life that folks sign up for, but it's not. And it goes ignored. I've had a number of women found in garbage cans. Some we know decapitated. I just had 2 boys shot for buying a pair of shoes on 119th and State. And 1 black boy will not grow to become a man. So when we carve out time to talk about certain issues, what's growing and alarming and concerning is life. Life, something you cannot get back, that comes at an iron cost that we have to pay. And the last topic I would love to discuss is the vision of the 9th Ward, moving us forward. We rarely get to talk about that. That's a world and a room that I dream to create because that excites me.
All right, thank you both very much. We're going to move to you guys' 2-minute closing statements now. And we're going to start with you, Ms. Draper, because you went second on the opening statements. Whenever you're ready.
Well, I thank you all for your patience, your humility, and your ears throughout this forum. I am the proud granddaughter of great migration descendants. For 40 plus years, our home was here in the 9th Ward, and now my husband and I are homeowners too. Life has a way of circling you back. And I tell people all the time, between my credit score and faith, that's what brought me here. You could have never told me that this would be my world or my plight, but this is all I dream, sleep, and focus about because there's nowhere else to run. Too many of us take flight elsewhere and come running right back to Chicago because this is what we call home. But if this is going to be home, then you all have to give me grace because I have to make this feel home. And I only feel home when I see people that want to make it home. Thank you so much. That was the 3,000 people that agreed with me in 2019. And I stepped up again because we needed more. Folks that are ready for change and progressive opportunities that impact us all for our quality of life are the people that I seek more than anything. I dream about you. I dream about you in all kinds of ways, because at the end of the day, we have to make this place better than we found it. And I'm not here to put weight on one person in one role, because everybody took a part in it, because everybody has their own interests. Each one of you all have a vision, and I look forward to hearing it, because there's a role for everybody. And we have to stop discarding people. We do a bad job of that as a country, but we can do a better job as a ward. This can be a global conversation to be held. One day, that's the dream I have. And I want to welcome those that can feel me. Because like I said, Roseland is the central nuclei. There's life outside of this viaduct, and it's hard. But we can meet it with equity and change it. For those that are old enough to remember Roseland, I want your memory to help push us forward, because we know not of.
You know, I don't think that this is rocket science, you all. I don't think that there is a very intricate and meticulous textbook answer to the perils of the Ninth Ward. What I think that this is that you have to understand that your vote is simply your voice. And do you want to continue to give your vote to people who do not take your voice to the city council? This is what's been going on for 2.5 decades in the Ninth Ward. Your voice has not yet reached the city council. It's just a matter of time until you're not able really to survive in the Ninth Ward anymore. And many of us will say already that time has come. We really can't survive in the Ninth Ward. As I've mentioned, you have to go outside of the ward to survive in the ward. And so the fact of the matter is that you don't want to be pushed out anymore. You want to be heard, and you want your issues addressed. I am a lifelong resident of the Ninth Ward, 3rd generation. I don't want for you to live off of your memories. You ought to be able to make memories with your new children, with your new families, with those who come into the Ninth Ward today. There ought to be a way to make another memory, not just down memory lane, but down Michigan Avenue, but down State Street, down 103rd, down 111th, down 115th, yes in Pullman, yes in Roseland, yes in Riverdale. You ought to be able to survive and thrive in the Ninth Ward. I am not one that is going to be able to put some kind of show on or whatever. They say politics and preaching shouldn't mix, but it says to us that unto us a child is given and a Savior is born, and the government should be upon his shoulders. Yes, I am a preacher. I know I sound like one, and you had been wondering this whole time. Yes, I am. But this is the logical next part of my service to mankind, is to then take your voice to the Chicago City Council.
All right. Thank you very much to the candidates, and thank you to the audience. I really appreciated your questions, and I think you asked some good questions. We're going to close with a quick set of remarks, first from Chairman of the Church Board, Randy Livingston, and then, oh, never mind, just him, and then I'll come back up. Quick reminder that these guys are going to be staying afterwards. They're going to be back there. If you have any more questions, if you want to talk to them, go shake their hands. I'm sure they'll be happy to meet you. It should go well. Here you go. Ooh.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters of Chicago for putting on this political forum here today. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to hear what your candidates had to say. Well, I had something else to say too. This Greenstone United Methodist Church is still practicing social distancing and the COVID-19 CDC standards pretty much. We do have a sign-in sheet in case you didn't sign in, and it explains as to what we're about, and if you're okay, you sign it. And you see that we have every other pew kind of roped off for social distancing. However, someone reached a couple of rows on the side over here, but that's okay. And if you wanted to wear your mask, fine. If not, fine. As long as you feel safe and comfortable, that's good. I know Phil said that the candidates will be staying over in case you wanted to ask questions personally, which is fine, but then we won't really be meeting in the back here because it's not enough space. We will be meeting in the fellowship hall right across the way, which has more room, so that, you know, most of you all like to stay can stay, and I guess you'll form a line for whichever candidate you want to ask questions for. And I'm glad you all were able to come out to hear what the candidates had to say, and if you want to hear more, you can stay after, and hope to see you then. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just a few quick words about the upcoming election that, you know, we're all here for the forum for. So early voting has started at the super site downtown. So if anyone is downtown, you know, for work or whatever, you can actually go vote at the super site right now. Early voting in wards is going to start February 13th, so that's when you'll be able to vote in your 9th Ward early voting location. The general election will be February 28th, and that will be at your precinct locations. So don't forget to get out and vote. Oh, and we will also be having, you know, our voter registration table. So if anyone has any questions about their voter registration status, how they can do it, any sort of deadlines around voter registration, we can answer your questions at the back.